The divided roar of the North for centuries. One single word was enough to awaken fear across Europe. Vikingar. Warriors who sailed impossible seas, conquered kingdoms, and carved their stories in fire and steel. But behind the myth of horned helmets and bloody raids, there lies a far more complex and far more human truth. The Vikings were not one single people. They were three brother nations, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, bound by blood, by frost, and by the sea itself. Yet divided by their visions of the world, their destinies, and their understanding of life. The Norwegians gazed westward, searching for new lands beyond the edge of the ocean. The Danes turned south, toward the wealth and power that hid behind the walls of Christian kingdoms. And the Swedes, they looked east toward the great rivers that would carry them deep into the heart of Russia and to the gates of Byzantium. Three peoples, one origin, three paths that would reshape the history of the world. What made them so different? Was it the landscape, the hunger, their gods, or the simple desire to survive? To understand them, we must travel back 1,000 years to the frozen heart of the North, where one of the most fascinating, feared, and admired cultures of all time was born. A land where the fire of humankind stood defiant against the eternal winter, where three nations would rise to challenge the hand of destiny itself. Open bracket, close bracket. The North does not forgive. It is a land where winter devours half the year and darkness feels endless. There, humanity learned to forge its destiny with bare hands. Along the rugged coasts of Scandinavia, where the sea crashes against the rocks and forests stretch beyond the horizon, life was not a right. It was a conquest. The cold shaped their spirit, scarcity taught them discipline, and isolation made them trust only in their own strength, their wit, and their courage. The lands we now call Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were not kingdoms nor nations. They were mosaics of clans and scattered villages, bound by a common tongue, a shared culture, and a deep reverence for nature. Each community had its leader, a jarl, a man of honor, who ruled through respect, not fear. Decisions were made in open assemblies called the Thing, where free men debated laws and solved disputes. In a world ruled by the sword, the Vikings had discovered something rare, that justice could rise from dialogue. But life was still harsh. The fields were small, the harvests meager, and the mountains limited their growth. Hunger did not wait for permission to arrive. Pause 3 seconds. It was necessity, more than ambition, that pushed the men of the North toward the sea. The ocean was both enemy and salvation, and over time they learned to tame it. From the forests they carved the soul of their freedom, their ships. The Drakkar, long and light, capable of crossing stormy oceans and slipping through narrow rivers. They were not just vessels, they were symbols of freedom, the wings with which the Viking people learned to fly above the waves. And in that flight, a new era was born, an age of discovery, conquest, and legend. But before Christian chroniclers wrote of them, before fear swept across Europe, the Vikings already had their own inner world, a universe ruled by gods and fate. Odin, the All-Father, sacrificed one of his eyes for wisdom. Thor, with his hammer Mjolnir, protected humankind from chaos. Freya and Freyr, symbols of fertility and balance, guarded the cycles of life and death. Their gods did not demand blind obedience. They demanded courage. They did not reward submission. They honored action. From that faith, their strength was born. They did not fear the end, because death was only another voyage. The brave would sail to Valhalla, the great hall of heroes, to fight and feast forever beside the gods. Every storm was a test. every battle a chance to leave a mark upon the world, and every name carved in stone or sung in a saga was a promise of immortality. At the edge of the north, where mountains rise like stone giants and the sea carves the land into endless fjords, the Norwegians were born, men and women shaped by a landscape that punished the weak and rewarded only those who endured. The land was scarce, the winters merciless. The mountains divided them, but the sea united them. To the Norwegians, the ocean was not a barrier. It was a path, their ally, their enemy, their mirror. While other peoples sought riches in the soil, the Norwegians found their destiny upon the waves. Their villages stretched along the coasts, always facing the horizon, as if the sea itself whispered promises of survival. From those shores their ships departed, guided by faith in their gods and by a hunger as ancient as the cold itself, to live, to conquer, to endure. The first to leave were the explorers. They ventured into unknown waters, guided only by the sun, the stars, and their own instinct. What they found on the other side would change the course of history. In the 9th century, Norwegian Vikings reached the coasts of Scotland, Ireland, and the Faroe Islands. But they didn't stop there. They kept sailing west, farther than any European before them. They discovered Iceland, a land of fire and ice where mountains smoked and the ground trembled beneath their feet. And when Iceland no longer satisfied their hunger, they went even farther, to Greenland, a vast frozen world of mystery and peril. These voyages defied reason and fear. The North Atlantic was no gentle sea. Its storms could swallow entire ships in minutes. Its waves struck like walls, and the cold sliced through flesh like the edge of a sword. But they never turned back. For Norwegians, every expedition was a promise of land, of freedom, and for some, of eternal glory. One of those men was Eric the Red. Exiled from Iceland for killing a man, he set sail in search of a new beginning. What he found was an immense, frozen island, and he called it Greenland, perhaps to give hope to those who would follow. There he built his own colony, a kingdom of exiles, and his spirit of adventure passed to his son, Leif Erikson. Leif inherited his father's hunger and his people's curiosity. Around the year 1000, he sailed from Greenland to a mysterious new land, covered in forests, crossed by rivers, and rich with life. He called it Vineland, the land of wine. Today we know it as part of North America, likely Newfoundland, Canada. 5 centuries before Columbus, the Norwegians had already reached the New World, the first Europeans to set foot there. Their stay was brief, but their journey proved something vital. The Viking spirit knew no limits. But the Norwegians were not only explorers, they were conquerors too. Their raids on Scotland and Ireland were fierce and relentless. They burned monasteries, destroyed villages, and built colonies that mixed with local life. Even Dublin, much the capital of Ireland, was born as a Viking settlement, founded in the year 841 by men of the north. Through these lands, the Norwegians left an indelible mark. They spread not only their strength, but their language, their art, and their trade. Their routes connected the farthest corners of the North Atlantic, from Norway to Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland. And they were more than warriors. They were craftsmen, sailors, and poets. Centuries later, the Icelandic sagas would preserve their memory, tales of pride, loss, and defiance, stories of men who challenged fate, and women who guarded the hearth and the honor of their kin. In those communities, women held power uncommon for the age. While men braved the seas, they ruled the farms, managed the land, and even governed in their husband's absence. They could inherit, divorce, and lead. In a world of iron and wind, they were the roots that kept everything from falling apart. The Norwegians lived between two worlds, one of struggle and survival, and one of spirit and destiny. They believed fate was written, but that the brave could challenge it. And in that tension between faith and defiance, their strength was born. The Norwegian landscape did not only shape their bodies, it shaped their soul. The mountains taught them patience, the sea taught them courage, and the winter taught them endurance. Their feats were no accident. They were the inevitable result of a people who refused to accept the limits set by nature. While southern kingdoms built walls, the Norwegians built ships, and when history tried to forget them, the wind of the north kept whispering their names. The spirit of the Norwegian Vikings still lingers, in the fjords where the sea sings their sagas, in the rune stones that tell their stories of courage and loss, and in the soul of a nation that still gazes toward the horizon with the same fascination as its ancestors. The Norwegians did not just conquer lands, they conquered the very idea of what was possible. For them, the end of the world was never the end, but the beginning of another story. While the Norwegian Vikings sailed west, chasing the edge of the world, their Danish brothers turned south, toward power. Beyond the North Sea lay the shores of England, France, and the Christian kingdoms of continental Europe, lands rich, fertile, and vulnerable. The Danes were not merely explorers, they were strategists. Where others saw the ocean as an obstacle, they saw a highway to conquest. Their homeland sat at the crossroads of two seas, the North and the Baltic, giving them unmatched control over trade and war. Unlike the Norwegians, driven by adventure, the Danes thought in terms of dominion and power. Their gaze was not on the horizon, but on the thrones beyond it. They wanted more than survival. They wanted rule. Along the Danish coasts, shipyards came alive. Carpenters, smiths, and merchants worked day and night to prepare vast fleets. Their drakkar ships were swift, solid, and countless. When they set sail, the sea darkened beneath their shadows. By the 9th century, the monasteries and villages of England began to fall under their raids. At first, they struck like lightning, sudden, brutal, gone by dawn. But soon those raids grew into campaigns. The Danes did not come only to plunder. They came to stay. Their armies moved like storms, disciplined, organized, and relentless. They conquered territories, founded settlements, and built a new law, the Danelaw, a vast region of northern and eastern England that lived under Viking rule. For decades, the Danelaw was a world within a world, where Norse language, customs, and laws merged with Anglo-Saxon life. Villages thrived under Danish lords, and many locals adopted the Viking way. They married, traded, and slowly the line between invader and inhabitant blurred. But the Danes were more than warriors. They were builders of political power. While Norwegians scattered across distant seas, the kings of Denmark unified their homeland. Strong monarchs emerged, leaders capable of raising armies and negotiating with Europe itself. One name stands above all others, Harald Blåtand, Harald Bluetooth, the king who united most of Denmark and Norway under one banner. He was also the first to bring Christianity to his realm, not just for faith, but for diplomacy, a bridge to the rest of Europe. His legacy echoes even now. The modern Bluetooth technology bears his name and symbol, a digital rune, a whisper of the old king who connected worlds. But his son, Sven Forkbeard, carried Denmark's power even farther. In the year 1013, Sven invaded England with a colossal fleet and achieved what few had dreamed possible. He became King of England. For a brief moment in history, the North ruled the South. His son, Canute the Great, would inherit that empire and elevate it to its peak. Canute ruled over Denmark, England, Norway, and parts of Sweden, forming what historians would call the North Sea Empire. Under his reign, the Viking world reached its zenith. Canute was not only a conqueror, he was a statesman. He brought order, trade, and a fragile peace between Christian and pagan lands. Under his hand, the Viking roar became governance, and for a moment the sword turned into a scepter. But power, like the tide, never stays still. After Canute's death, his empire fractured. Old rivalries returned. The kingdoms once united drifted apart again. Yet his legacy endured, etched into the stone of Europe. The Danish influence reshaped England. Their words still live in its language. Window, knife, and countless towns still bear Norse names. York, Leicester, Grimsby, remnants of the Viking world woven into modern life. Of all the Viking peoples, the Danes understood the true power of permanence. They knew plunder brought riches, but rule brought the future. Their raids were not just violence, they were strategy. They built civilization upon the ashes of conquest. While Christian chroniclers called them barbarians, the Danes were shaping a new order, one that merged the strength of the North with the organization of the South. A realm where the sword opened the path, but law kept it standing. In Denmark, kings learned that power must be held not only with iron, but with legitimacy. And from that lesson emerged the seed of the modern Scandinavian state, a kingdom that survived the centuries while others vanished into dust. The Danish spirit was, above all, the spirit of balance. They were warriors, yes, but also diplomats, traders, and builders. They knew when to fight and when to forge peace, when to dominate and when to integrate. In the grand mosaic of the Viking world, the Danes were the forgers of kingdoms. They turned the sea into a bridge and power into legacy. When the roar of the North began to fade, it was the Danes who left the deepest mark upon Europe. Their legacy was not only conquest, but endurance. While others dissolved into legend, the Danes transformed into power. From scattered clans of the North emerged a new idea, a kingdom that looked beyond the sword and understood that true rule is measured not by what you destroy, but by what you build. Deep within the silent forests of the East, where rivers twist like veins of silver beneath the snow, a different kind of Viking emerged. Not the raiders who burned monasteries, nor the sailors who challenged the Atlantic, but the travelers, those who connected worlds. The Swedish Vikings did not look west like their Norwegian brothers, nor south like the Danes. Their gaze turned east, toward the great rivers that flowed through the lands we now call Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. There, they found their destiny. The Scandinavians who ventured into those regions became known as the Varangians. Their story was quieter than the conquests of the West, but no less extraordinary. While others left ruins and fire in their wake, the Swedes left routes, cities, and alliances. They built bridges where others built walls. Armed with their longships, they crossed the Baltic Sea and sailed deep into the continent, along the Neva, the Volkhov, the Dnieper, and the Volga. Their ships glided over the water like ghosts, reaching lands no Scandinavian had ever seen. Their journeys were not only of conquest, but of commerce and discovery. Amber from the north, iron, furs, and honey. These were their treasures. In return, they brought back silk, wine, spices, and silver coins from the distant east. The Swedish Vikings were the first to connect Scandinavia to the vast Muslim world through the trade routes that reached as far as Baghdad. In 9th century Swedish graves, archaeologists found Arabic coins inscribed with verses from the Quran, proof that the men of the north had touched the ends of the known world. Where other Vikings ruled through force, the Swedes ruled through diplomacy, through trade, through understanding. Yet peace was never guaranteed. Wealth attracts both partners and predators. The Varangians clashed with Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes, but they also forged alliances. From those alliances, something new was born, the first foundation of what would one day become the Rus of Kiev. According to old chronicles, the Slavic tribes invited the Varangians to rule and bring order. And so came Rurik, a Viking chieftain who established his power in Novgorod around the year 862. His dynasty created the first organized state in Eastern Europe. His descendants would rule for centuries. Even the name Russia is believed to come from Rus, the word Eastern peoples used to describe the Norse. From the frozen forests of the north rose the seed of an empire. The Swedish Vikings didn't seek fleeting glory or vast conquests. Their power grew slowly, built on trade routes, diplomacy, and patience. They were pragmatic, calm, calculated. Their ambition was not in bloodshed, but in the control of silver and silk, of pathways, not battlefields. The sagas describe them as quiet men with iron wills. They listened before they acted, and when they moved, they struck with precision. Many of them reached even farther, into the richest empire of their time, Byzantium. There, the Varangians became legendary. They joined the Varangian Guard, an elite force sworn to protect the Byzantine emperor himself. Tall, blond, and fierce, the men of the north became the emperor's personal shield. Byzantine chronicles spoke of them with awe. Men from a frozen world, loyal to death, bearing axes with pride and honor. Some died far from their homeland, but their names carved in runes and stone returned home on the wind of the north. The Swedish Vikings built invisible bridges between civilizations that had never before met. They linked Scandinavia with the Arab world, with Byzantium, and with the Slavic tribes. Where others saw enemies, they saw opportunity. Their swords served the merchant. Their ships served destiny. In their homeland, the lakes and rivers of Mälaren and Uppland became centers of wealth and power. Great rune stones rose from the earth, telling stories of journeys, of ambition, of loss and return. Each carved symbol was more than art. It was a memory made eternal, a farewell, a victory, a legacy. For the Swedes, the world was vast, and the North was never a prison. They did not need to conquer to be remembered. Their influence was subtle, but it endured for centuries. Even when the Viking Age began to fade, the echo of Sweden's eastward reach still resonated. In the runestones, in the silver coins buried beneath the soil, and in the stories of monks and merchants who whispered of the men from the north who came sailing up the rivers. The Swedish Vikings were the invisible thread that wove the fabric of the medieval world. They were the diplomats of the north, the bridge builders between cultures, the architects of a new map. While their names were lost to history, their legacy endures in the foundations of 3 continents. For while the iron of the Danes forged kingdoms and the sails of the Norwegians touched the horizon, the Swedes built a civilization without spilling a single unnecessary drop of blood. They understood what others did not, that power is not always taken by the sword, but earned through the longest road, the fairest trade, and the patience of time. For centuries, the word Viking has echoed through time, a word of fire, iron, and conquest. But when we look beyond the myth, we discover something greater. The Viking Age was not only an age of war, it was an age of transformation. Norwegians, Danes, Swedes, 3 peoples, born of the same cold light beneath the same pale northern sun, yet guided by different destinies. The Norwegians followed the call of the sea. They were the dreamers, the ones who dared to cross oceans and touch the edge of the known world. The Danes were the strategists, forgers of kingdoms, builders of power, rulers where others only conquered. Their legacy was not just of battle, but of structure, of order, of civilization. And the Swedes, They were the silent weavers of the ancient world. They turned trade into diplomacy, voyage into bridge, and words into power. Three visions, three paths, one essence. They all shared the same inner flame, the certainty that destiny is not awaited, it is forged. The North made them hard, but it also taught them to look far, to see beyond hunger, beyond fear, beyond the horizon. And when the Viking roar faded, when the sails vanished beyond the mist, and the swords rested upon their graves, something remained, their spirit. A spirit that still breathes in the Scandinavian heart, in silent discipline, in endurance against adversity, in the endless search for balance between strength and wisdom. The Vikings disappeared, but their echo never died. It became culture, it became science, it became values. The same drive that once pushed them to cross the Atlantic now pushes their descendants to reach for the stars. Because the Viking spirit does not belong to the past. It lives in every soul that looks at the horizon and dares to move forward, whether the sea is calm or storming. The legacy of the North was never fear or violence. It was courage. The courage of those who refuse to bow before the impossible. And as long as there is someone who hears the wind and feels it calling them farther, the roar of the North will never fade.